Now then, if you like the Beatles, Elton John, David Bowie or Pink Floyd, they all started their careers playing skiffle music.
Skiffle music, yeah, and this month marks 70 years since the release of the song, which is credited for supercharging skiffle in the UK, Rock Island Line by Lonnie Donegan. Just have a remember of this.
Going on a Rock Island Line, it's a mighty good road. Oh, when the Rock Island Line, you see the mighty good road. When the Rock Island Line is the road to ride. The Rock Island Line, you see the mighty good road. If you want fun around, you kind of body like a man, you get the ticket at the station on the line. I may be right and I may be wrong. No, you're gonna miss me when I'm gone.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? We're joined now by the musician Billy Bragg. Morning to you, Billy. You have been talking about skiffle music for a long time, but to a lot of people, they still won't quite know what it is and its importance to the artists that we've heard over the last few decades. So just tell us all about it.
Skiffle music is what the Beatles were doing when they were at school, basically. Lonnie Donegan has this hit in January 1956, and it comes to a generation of teenagers who were born in the 1940s, so they kind of grew up either during the war or in the years after the war. And you've got to remember that wartime rationing in Britain ended in 1954. So if you were John Lennon, born in 1940, you couldn't go in a sweet shop and buy sweets until you were almost left school. So these kids were looking for something to identify themselves as different from their parents and their parents' experience. And Donegan comes along singing this song, playing a guitar, which is not really a big instrument in British music at the time. And these mostly young schoolboys get this urge, this kind of almost like a playground buzz to go out and play songs written by this American guy, Leadbelly. And that's what Rock Island Line is. It's a Leadbelly song.
And it was that song, was it, that Lonnie Donegan song, which just transformed, just instantly created this whole new buzz? Yeah,
it was really. You've got to remember at the time, there was no such thing as a teenager. The BBC, which was the main broadcaster, well, the only broadcaster, national broadcaster, catered for adults and children. There were no teenagers. So these young people were leaving school now. They had some money to spend, and they were going out, particularly young women, going out buying records, buying clothes, buying cosmetics, and they were suddenly visible. And Donegan kind of comes at a time when music has really been pretty boring. It's mostly people like, if your listeners, viewers can remember, Mantovani. It was heavy strings, crooners, and Donegan comes along. You heard the energy he had just in that version there, and it's like out of nowhere, suddenly there's this new music, and really importantly, it's made by someone from Britain. You know, people were used to hearing Americans, but Donegan was from East Ham.
Yeah, and I mean, presumably Lonnie Donegan was influenced by somewhere. So where's sort of going even further back? Where were his influences?
Well, skiffle comes out of the trad jazz boom after the Second World War, when young musicians in London, around the country, wanted to play the music that was played in New Orleans around the turn of the 20th century. And they also wanted to educate their audience about where this African-American music came from. And in the context of that, they would put down their jazz instruments, their wind instruments, and play acoustic guitar stuff to play old blues songs, predominantly songs by Leadbelly. And that aspect of the breakdown, they called it breakdown to start, but then they called it skiffle. That became really popular among teenagers, and it took off from there.
Given how influential it has been then, and how it's influenced some of the biggest names in rock and pop music over the last few decades, are you sad that it maybe doesn't get the respect, the attention that it deserves, skiffle?
Well, it's a bit of a problem, really, because there weren't really that many skiffle artists. It came and went, almost like punk rock, really, very similar to punk rock. I mean, you can count on the fingers of one hand the number of skiffle bands that got into the charts. But at the same time, there are an estimated between 30,000 to 50,000 skiffle groups playing in school halls and scout huts and gymnasiums around the country. And these kids, when they came of age, they formed bands. In 1964, when the Beatles broke in America, because of skiffle, there was a whole generation of British bands who'd already been playing for 5 years to follow them into the American charts. Whereas the American teenagers, they don't really start playing guitars until the folk revival, which is in 1959, 1960, running into Bob Dylan. So really, skiffle is the nursery of the the British invasion of America in the 1960s. All of those bands that you've heard of, everybody from the Beatles all the way to Led Zeppelin, even the guys from ABBA played in a skiffle band. So in many ways, you know, without skiffle, there really wouldn't have been the 1960s as we know it. It's the nursery of the British invasion of America.
I heard you talking to Mark Radcliffe on the Folk Show on Radio 2, which you can listen back to on Sounds, about your own love of skiffle. Just on a personal level, how's it inspired you?
Well, it inspires me because it's similarities to punk. It's the original do-it-yourself music. The interesting thing about these kids was this music wasn't spoon-fed to them. They had to go and find it, and they connected with music made by African Americans. Basically, skiffle is African American roots music, and to do that after the war, to go and find that, they made their own culture, and that to me is really, really inspirational. And I think every generation has to find a way to make themselves anew. And these people did it by picking up a guitar and saying to their parents, you know, that was then, this is now. They were trying to build a bridge to the future, I think, and that meant playing guitars and looking to the West and turning into the 1960s.
Billy, one of the other things we've been talking about this morning, we've just been talking about the lack of grassroots venues, places to play live music, small venues, and the problems that they're suffering at the moment. So Music Venue Trust saying that half of them haven't made a profit in the last 12 months. In terms of the UK's music sector, how important are those grassroots venues?
Very, very important. How do you find if you're any good? How do you find out if the songs that you're writing, the material you're making, the poses you're throwing are connecting with people? You can't do all this online. And there's something you can get from an audience that you can't get from the internet, and that is that visceral reaction to something you've said or played or done. So it is absolutely crucial. It's where you do your apprenticeship. I certainly, you know, I spent probably a year, 18 months going around playing, opening for people in pubs, but often playing for nothing. There is a problem that there's not a lot of money about, and it costs, you know, I was playing solo, so I could manage to do it. But if you have a band, it is expensive. So it ends up being something that's only possible for people who've got rich parents, and rock and roll shouldn't be like that. It should be for people who've got an idea, want to get out in the world and want to change the world, and that's increasingly becoming more difficult for people to do.
And we hear that maybe it's a knock-on from that apparently there are fewer young artists, fewer young bands coming through. They're just not forming anymore.
Yeah, it might be something to do with the fact that, you know, when I was 19, if I wanted to talk about the world, the only platform available to me was to learn to play guitar, write songs and do gigs. Now, obviously, there's loads of ways you can express your opinion and put your voice out there and feel you're part of the debate. So it might be something to do with that, but I do think it's much more difficult for people to get started, and I do think our young musicians need a little bit more support.
Billy Bragg, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
That's an interesting idea, isn't it? That maybe rather than singing and performing and writing music, young people are TikToking and just talking and ranting.
Yeah, really interesting.